He says that large-scale hypnosis demands a setting. The crowd's attention has to be attracted in some way, and once things are happening outside the confines of the consulting room, it has to be turned away from reality, and its imagination must be fired. Inspired, no doubt, by the Jesuits, let's move on quickly, and by the French Revolution, Le Bon urged that the methods of the theater should be taken up in the world of politics, with the stage as a model of social relationships. Remember I was saying? They think of you as one act, one crowd under their control. One theater of operation, right? As a model of social relationships in dramatic form, and as a place where those relationships were observed. And when anybody's done 5 minutes of homework, you really know that when you're talking Jesuits, there's not a hair's breadth of difference when you mean Illuminati. They're one and the same thing. So Masonry, Illuminati, they're all into rites and rituals and theater performance and vast social metaphorical rituals. And that is, and my goodness, how much does hypnosis play in secret societies, my goodness? They're trying to turn our world into a version of their lodge. We know this, of course, because there's evidence of it even on the news, that people can be hypnotized. We've seen it in the Jim Jones Guyana cult and so much. What else was there? Heaven's Gate, the Order of the Sun Temple over in the Netherlands, and so forth and so on. And the researcher Paul Levy says in Breaking Bush's Spell, George Bush is a master hypnotist who skillfully puts people under his spell. Bush mesmerizes people by using simple, repetitive phrases. To quote Nazi propaganda chief Goebbels, propaganda must therefore always be essentially simple and repetitious. Keep repeating them in the simplified form despite the objections of the intellectuals. They put you through 18 years of school to turn you into an infant. So, of course, they're going to have to speak as if you're an 8th grader, because they've just done a beautiful job of turning you into that, as anyone who reads a newspaper can tell. Bush's talking points, his buzzwords, are his incantations. These magic words act as opiates to the fearful masses. To quote ex-Harvard University President James Bryant Conant, some of mankind's most terrible misdeeds have been committed under the spell of certain magic words or phrases. And this, again, the power of the word. And how do we make a word? We spell it. There's a hidden meaning even in those terms there. And then on the other side, you talk about the fearful society. My God, what does the media throw at us every 5 minutes? If it's not economic meltdown, it's some other phobia that's going around. They're creating the paranoid society. Food, disease, chickens, flu, borders, Mexicans. I mean, come on, the list is endless. Some may have some roots in fact, but look at the delivery. It's a constant drip feed over years. The individual scenario is actually usually unimportant, but it's the constant drip feed that really does the damage. And we know where to go to get this every single day. Fairly unbalanced. We're also allowed the court jesters, because knowing that we get pent up, we need to release all that anxiety. They will not allow it through anger, which is a very legitimate emotion, by the way. Those who are familiar with my work will understand what I mean by that. We don't have time to elaborate, I'm afraid. All I can say is that culture or our societies don't like people to be in touch with their emotions. But they will allow you to vent, because they still need that exorcism of that pent-up emotion. And one of the ways is to laugh it off. The only trouble is, and I like to laugh like everybody else, but the problem is that in the laughter there's inaction. So just know that. I'm not saying you shouldn't laugh, shouldn't enjoy fun and jokes and all of that, but realize that behind it is a safety valve, because in that laughter, yes, there is the exorcisation of the angst and the built-up content, but there's also inaction that follows. Whereas with anger, there's action that follows. And that's why they don't like it. Now, Dr. Eric Sigman, in his book Remotely Controlled, another book I hope you pick up, it's a very, very good book on this same subject, he says that 44% of adults reported one or more substantial symptoms of stress. 90% had one or more symptoms to at least some degree, after the attacks, right? While the American Psychiatric Association measured the increase in psychotropic drug use after September 11th, 2001, The attacks were unprecedented in scope, and Americans viewed them over and over again on television. There is a significant rise in new prescriptions for antidepressants, antipsychotics, and tranquilizers. That doesn't mean I'm saying that people shouldn't have had a reaction. Of course they should. But the media co-opted the fact that we react emotionally to horrible things. That's legitimate. But these people know how to work with those legitimate idioms for another purpose, another cause. He goes on to say that UK Prison Service has been involved in a secret incel television project. As budgets and staff are cut and overcrowding rises, television's tranquilizing effects have been discussed at the highest levels as the cheapest and most effective way to subdue a prison population. That was whistleblown by Stanley Kubrick in Clockwork Orange. The General Secretary of the Prisons Governors Association has been revealed as saying, "It's the best control mechanism you can think of. We know what the British are like. Shove them in front of a television and you won't hear a peep out of them." He says, research by Professor Herbert Krugman found that within 30 seconds of turning on the television, our brains become neurologically less able to make judgments about what we see and hear on the screen. Our brain treats incoming information uncritically. Our brain waves switch to a predominantly alpha waves, indicating an unfocused, receptive lack of attention. Our brain's left hemisphere tunes out while we're watching television. This tuning out allows the right hemisphere of our brain, which processes information emotionally and uncritically, to function unimpeded. We could stop right there, actually. We could just stop there and go and enjoy the rest of the day, because that's it. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a left and right brain. Again, see, we're back to the same paradigm. It's okay to have the brain, but look what they've discovered by studying us. They have enormous psychological, biological knowledge of us. And we need it too. You fight them with the weapons they're using on us. You don't need to invent the wheel again. Now, Michael Gazzaniga has spent at least 40 years studying the very difference between the left and right brain and recently described this dichotomy. He said the left hemisphere has proved quite dominant for major cognitive abilities such as the problem solving. The right hemisphere, meanwhile, is severely deficient in difficult problem solving. Gazzaniga has found that the left brain is always hard at work seeking the meaning of events, constantly looking for order and reason and explanations. It is very interesting that these left hemispheric qualities are affected when watching television, or are affected when television arrives in a society for the first time. And like hypnotism, watching TV is also thought to subdue the involvement of the most sophisticated part of our brain, the frontal lobe. This is the brain's executive control system, responsible for planning, organizing, self-control, moral judgment, and attention. So, Ayn Rand's rational man, how can he function in a climate like that where the content coming in, the stimuli coming in, is completely bypassing his frontal lobes and his rational mind? Now, perhaps it is easier to understand why television advertising costs up to $5 million per minute. These effects are good news for those who want to engage us through television, but they don't exactly sound like an exercise in free will. So, remember this, you all know that these freaky cults, but when you research it, what is the normal mantra that you hear? When these people leave the cult and wake up and tell you all about it, don't they always say, yeah, when I joined, they told me to always break off from my family, to distance myself from my familiar environs. Isn't that fact? There's a big thing with cults. Now, I'm not so interested in that the cults are doing it. I'm interested in how Big Brother's doing it. It's constant disassociation from the familiar. It's pulling up your roots. And if you take it to its fullest extent, it's pulling up your racial roots, your cultural roots, your ancestral roots, your lineage, your family, all those. That's the ultimate, version of it. To disassociate you, to break you off, to give you faux independence, faux rebellion, so that then they have total control over you. Another aspect that works on the same level is simply the fast pace of life, does it? Just by throwing a lot of stimuli at you, all the different, the speed of our culture, the hyper speed of our culture also has this unrooting, dislocating effect that plays right into the hands of the cults. And I don't mean Jim Jones. Nothing so eludes consciousness, says Alan Watts, the great Zen teacher. Nothing so eludes conscious inspection as consciousness itself. We're talking about what leaves us open to manipulation. I mean, we have Bruce Lipton, they've all said it. We're using a speck of what we call consciousness. Let's not even bring in what the mystics have to say about that subject and have been saying for centuries about it. Nobody listens to them anyway. All right, so then turn to the scientists. Even now they have discovered that you're using a phenomenally small part of your consciousness, which is ultimately, in its ultimate form, your Merkaba is the universe itself. I mean, it's even ludicrous to say, oh, it's in here in my head. Your consciousness, ultimately speaking, is her. There she is outside. Go and say hello. That's you, by the way. But he's saying that, look, nothing so eludes conscious inspection as your consciousness itself. You've got divisions, you've got dams, you've got canals, you've got barbed wire fences, 50-foot thick concrete walls inside your own mind and your own consciousness. And this is why, this is the essence of everything I have to say in this subject matter. Until you deal with that inner republic, no politician in whatever color, shape, form he comes, no matter what gender, what sex, what lingo or level of sophistication, can fix it, because you're not dealing with the root problem. Lieutenant Colonel Bogrite said, once you have solved a major problem, all the other problems heal themselves on their own. Once you have found out what the real poison, infection in the blood is and get rid of it, a lot of other things naturally heal yourself without you going in and micromanaging it. And he says, this is why the root of consciousness has been called, paradoxically, the unconscious. Left brain, right brain, frontal lobe, back brain, limbic realm, mammalian brain, body, mind, God, world. Haven't we been able to see this? The divisions that we create for ourselves, and then divisions within divisions. Big Brother is rolling. They can't even stand up. They're rolling around laughing at the ease in which they can control everyone. Heraclitus said it centuries ago. You could not reach the ends of the psyche though you went the whole way. So deep is its nature. And again, as I say, that's the key word, nature. It is nature. And the shamanic people know that. The Zen people are forever telling you, the Taoists, the real self is the no self. When you really find what your selfhood is, something else opens up. Something incredible. Moving up to the 17th and 18th century, the great philosopher Leibniz said, it is a great source of error to believe that there is no perception in the soul besides those of which it is conscious. Philo of Alexandria, it is a cruel thing that the inlets of the senses should be opened wide for the torrents of the objects of sense to be poured, like a river in spate, into their gaping orifices, with nothing to stay their violent rush. For when the mind, swallowed up by the huge impouring, is found at the bottom, unable so much as to rise to the surface and look out. That's that overstimulation again. Daniel Goleman, in a monumentally important book, Emotional Intelligence, says that research has shown that in the first few seconds of our perceiving something, we do not only unconsciously comprehend what it is, but decide whether we like it or not. The cognitive unconscious presents our awareness with not just the identity of what we see, but an opinion about it. Our emotions have a mind of their own, one which can hold views quite independently from our rational mind. In other words, another split, another division. Although I added this slide mostly because he's talking about the milliseconds, the speed in which we make emotional and rational decisions faster than we can even think we think. Vance Packard says, an official cited the case of a man who under hypnosis told why he preferred a certain make of car and always bought it. This man under hypnosis was able to repeat word for word an ad he had read more than 20 years before that had struck his fancy. One ad man I talked with revealed that he had often speculated on the possibility of using TV announcers who had been trained in hypnotism for deeper impact. That was whistleblown in the movie Looker with Albert Finney. And in a few other programs as well. Now, research shows that even under the deepest hypnosis, and we don't have time to elaborate on this, it's very interesting, and if you buy the book, Open to Suggestion, he fills this out. I've written here, research shows that even under deep hypnosis, part of the mind remains aware. Hypnotists have loosely referred to this deep, subtle field of awareness as the self, which psychologists obviously use with no problem, but the research scientists have now will say loosely, I think that's the self. meaning that on a scale of, say, 100, you're already in hypnosis by 30, you're completely losing it, almost unconscious by 50, because you can no longer tell that there's a hypnotist guiding you. So by 80 and 100, you're completely under the deepest form of trance imaginable. And by the way, they already pick people from the world who are absolutely the most suggestible to hypnosis as well, by the way. What happens? The reports are, after many years of experiments, that even in the deepest levels of hypnosis, you are still aware. But it's not the ego. And it's not the kind of awareness that the ego, when you're in it, when you come back to consciousness, go, hey, Doc, how's it going? When you come back, it's not that kind of linear awareness. It's more of an omnidirectional thing that they started to realize, oh boy, we're back to what the mystics have been saying. But they just said, we'll just loosely call it the self. However, Ernest Hilgard was the brave psychologist, the brave researcher who went a little bit further and coined a term called the hidden observer. It's not a mystical theory. It is not a metaphysical theory. It is not some obscure philosophical concept. It is an absolute fact that within you, in the deepest recesses of your mind, when the conscious mind that we're familiar with shuts down to almost absolute, like it's not there, which is death. Complete absence of the world around you, complete sensual shutdown, like was whistle-blown in the movie Altered States. You literally, and they're not going so far as to say it, but they basically, in so many words, they're saying it, you're now aware of yourself. But even that sentence means nothing now, because you are not aware of yourself, if you get my meaning. It might be more aware of you. I've often said in my other work on this very subject that perhaps we should look at it like this, and this goes out to psychologists who always say, and they may be right, I may be wrong, they're saying that you have to watch. The ego is defensive because it might be overwhelmed by the id, by the unconscious. This is the standard textbook understanding of the dynamics of the psyche. That the ego exists and has its defenses partly because it is afraid that it will be overwhelmed by the waves, the content of the unconscious. What happens, and I think that what we've been looking at here is somewhat of a proof of what I'm going to say. What happens if it's not that the ego is going to be overwhelmed by the unconscious, but embraced by the unconscious? We don't have time to elaborate on this fascinating concept, but it changes everything. And so what happens if we've been sort of mind controlled just by the terminology to have an ambivalent relationship with our own minds? As R.D. Laing said, psychophobia, you're afraid of your own minds, you're afraid of your own thought. And you're wondering what they're going to do up on the corridors of power? They've been able to bring nations down with this. It's an unseen hand of control that works psychically. Are we aware of it? Anyone can tell you what physical crime is all about. It's well documented and should be continue to be documented. But what about the entire matrix of the psychic dictatorship? We need to. This is what the Age of Awakening is all about. Awaken to what? Because we have no chance otherwise. But we have all the chance in the world when we start discovering how they work. What is the know thine enemy, but know also the weapons that they are using, and that takes study. No shortcuts. Total dedication, total put everything else down. This is important. Yeah, humanity is suffering. Now, in 1890, the psychologist Dr. Morton Prince remarked on the possibility of there being normally in all of us a lower stratum of consciousness which is alive to everything about us, while our upper minds are busy. So if the Pied Pipers can go, yeah, we got more work for you to do too, Truman, and we'll even build a perfect global society for you to keep you busy and decorated while you're doing this external work in the realm of the persona. Now, says Temple, the fullest account of it, of the Hidden Observer, is the remarkable book Divided Consciousness by one of America's most noted psychologists, Professor Ernest Hilgard. In his book, Hilgard points out that the very word profound comes from profundus, near the bottom. How many people want to go into the bottom? Everyone wants a one-season world. Professor C.S. Lewis, the great Christian author, said, look, God does not want to hear your adulations from the mountain peaks. It means nothing. He wants to hear it when you're in the gutter, in the troughs of life, in the dark. And our temple says that as for the deep self, presumed to be identical with Hilgard's hidden observer, standing partially outside of time, there is a great deal of evidence for this phenomenon. It's science. It's not bogus. It's not metaphysics. It's not even mysticism. They're finding it out, and they're hidden it from you, and this book blows the whistle. It's a very interesting book. It also accounts, of course, for the great, as we know, some of the abilities that we all love to hear about. We haven't the time to even detail any of them, but I will talk about one, of course, which is this ability that some people have to dialogue with the animals. Ultimately, it's the rapport with nature. Well, we know who had that, don't we? The Druids, the Ominous, the Shaman. I don't mean the tribes, I mean the shaman, the tribe within the tribe, the crazy horses, not the rest of the bickering mob that they had to deal with, just like in every country. But that ability that some people have, and certainly was in the olden days, that was because this so-called hidden observer now wasn't hidden, is basically all I can point out. So that talking to nature phenomenon, we know that children with prodigious memories, kids at 4 have enormous, you've heard about those kids who can do mathematics like nobody's business, or the Mozart syndrome, that kind of thing. So let's pause for a minute while I change the slides, just take a breather. Here's some books I recommend when I do this particular talk. That was refreshing. Very, very noted and brilliant men and women who've written on this subject. Now, John E. Hasty, a Hollywood producer, says that TV viewers cannot be regarded as the audience to be entertained. They are prospects for what the sponsor has to sell. So pragmatism, they're not interested in you talking about souls and spirits and hidden observers. They're here to decorate the incarceration. Now, Victor Lebeau said, he was a marketing consultant, he said that man's appetite for goods must be quickened and increased, said Paul Mazur. Our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and the use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfactions, our ego satisfactions in consumption. We need things consumed, he says, burned up, worn out, replaced, and discarded at an ever-increasing rate. And he doesn't just mean products. He's talking about children, human beings, the planet. In a Business Week article, it said that it looks as though all of our business forces are bent on getting everyone to borrow, spend, buy, waste, and want. And see, the books I just showed you, like I said in the introduction, it has been done. There's books written. The thing that distinguishes my work is the occult overlaying. It is not just about rich men wanting to get richer. It's not just about making a consumer society. I have to, again, pause and reemphasize this. It's a fascinating subject anyway, sociologically, but just never forget that, I like to look at it from that it's part of an occult agenda. That's all. I mean, obviously, you know that. But these are the same creatures who gave you wonderful ideas like Coca-Cola fixing headaches. Mother's milk, don't you know? And the earlier the better. That's what it is. Experts know all about it. He said, this is the secret of propaganda. Those who are to be persuaded by it should be completely immersed in it, immersed in the ideas of the propaganda without ever noticing that they're being immersed in it. Them and us. The English author, novelist, J.K. Chesterton said that journalism is a false picture of the world, thrown onto a lighted screen in a darkened room so that the real world is not seen and the unreal world is seen. We live under secret government, conducted by a secret process called publicity. The G. Edward Griffins of the world have always pointed out it's concentric. You have the inner cabal here, yes, but you have to have that publicity shell of minions on the outer area, outer periphery, who don't have the foggiest idea that there's anything occult involved in this. Half the writers of these books that I've studied all my life haven't never address it. To them, it's just, skulls in the ice cubes. The question of who puts it there and what kind of minds those people must have to want to do that, with dead bodies and decapitated females and skulls and ravens and skeletons and all forms of demonic stuff there, never enters their mind, of course. In Fortune magazine, article said, a bewildering array of techniques and disciplines are being borrowed from the social sciences for one great cumulative assault on the perversity of man. Well, they're a cult of Dionysus, after all. They love it. And one of those, of course, is this whole idea of the team players. It's a sort of a 1950s phenomenon. Before 1950s, you had a lot of emphasis on the individual. You didn't have any of this collectivism nonsense. But after that period, in a corporate environment, no misfits were allowed, no individualists. The unions, of course, were destroyed. Jimmy Hoffa, anybody who stood against him was wiped out by the great champions, the great presidents. I've talked in my main work on this subject about the various techniques. Like Jordan, I believe it's very ancient. I talk about the Medes, where does the word media even come from? Go to the Michael Tsarion website, click on next, there's an article on it. We're just experiencing neo-sorcery. But that neo-sorcery is definitely connected to the ancient world. It's not something modern. You only need to look. I'll give you just one example, because I've done this in so many other works. I'll just give you one example. That symbol that you saw at the elections, it's quite distinctive, the sunrise, obviously, in the three striations and the colors. It comes directly out of the cult of Aton that I've exposed in my works. When people speak about Luciferians and this whole agenda of control, or even the word Illuminati, I agree, and I have a different term for them, though. Atonism. People should read up on Atonism. That's where that symbol is coming from. It's just a stylized version of the sun rays of Akhenaten, directly pertaining to that pharaoh and his cult. Turning up again. Another expert on the subject of advertising, Gene Kilbourne, says that almost everyone holds the misguided belief that advertisements don't affect them, don't shape their attitudes, don't help define their dreams. What I hear more than anything else is, I don't pay attention to ads, I just tune them out. They have no effect on me. Of course, I hear this often from young men wearing Budweiser caps. That was whistleblown in... I can't remember the movie that whistle blew that, where the guy goes, we're not corporate, and he's wearing 3 different logos on his hat and his T-shirt and what have you, Wayne's World or something. W.B. Keyes, one of the great experts in the subject, said that if the same meticulous attention were given to a 90-minute Hollywood feature film that is given to a 1-minute commercial, the film would take years to complete and the national budget to finance. A single 30-second commercial can easily require a week or more to film, not counting the extensive time often required for lab work on special effects. A single 10-second segment of a TV commercial may be shot and reshot 20 times just to get it right. Each movement, position, action, and reaction are carefully studied and calculated for audience effects at both the conscious and unconscious level. Vance Packard has said that most of these Madison Avenue companies have at least 50 paid psychologists on staff to come in and view every microsecond of these advertisements. Kilbourne says that in truth, we are all influenced by advertising. There's no way to tune out this much information, especially when it is carefully designed to break through the tuning out process. Now that they can do, no problem. More deeply, of course, we know about subliminals. But subliminal perception was mentioned as a possibility by the philosopher Aristotle, and then by Leibniz, as we saw. And he talked about the possibility of minute perceptions that are little noticed, which are not sufficiently distinguished to be perceived or remembered, but which become known through certain consequences. Well, again, you have that unconscious mind. Brian Wilson Keyes rightly describes it as a language within a language. You're being spoken to, you're being communicated with all the time. But why I get so uptight about this is because so is also the universe communicating with you. This is the shell that's in the way. Their noise is in between you and that other thing that is ultimately an extension of yourself. You see, you're not going to hear that other, because remember, the spiritual force in the universe does not turn up its volume. You have to turn yours down. That's the dynamic. It's not going to scream over our racket. Now, Keyes goes on to say, it is the still small voice, the poets have called it. It is virtually impossible, says Key, to pick up a newspaper or magazine, turn on a radio or television set, read a promotional pamphlet or the telephone book, or shop through a supermarket without having your subconscious mind purposely massaged by some monstrously clever photographer, writer, or technician. As a culture, North America might well be described as one enormous, magnificent, self-service, subliminal massage parlor. Kilborn says only 8% of an ad's message is received by the conscious mind. The rest is worked and reworked deep within the recesses of the brain, where the product's positioning and repositioning takes place. As long as this illusion of volition persists, they would consciously have nothing to fear from the commercials. People are prone to trust anything over which they believe they have control. TV commercials appear foolish, clumsy, and ineffectual on purpose. They are made to appear this way at the conscious level in order to be consciously ridiculed and rejected. The target aimed at the human mind is the subliminal or the unconscious. The real message, the one that sells, is planted securely in the viewer's unconscious. Now, Dr. Lechner says that before one can understand the subliminal techniques advertisers use to influence the audience, one must understand the vulnerabilities in humans they tap into. The human being is a complex creature. The same complexity that gives us the ability to manipulate objects also makes us vulnerable to manipulation. Once the advertisers find these vulnerabilities, and they've done extensive research, there is little the public can do to defend themselves against the onslaught. Marshall McLuhan says that Professor Key, this was in the introduction to the book Subliminal Seduction, he says that Professor Key has helped to show how the deceits of subliminal advertising can be a means of revealing unexpected truth. The childlike faith of the ad agencies in four-letter words points to our obsession with infantile bathroom images as the chemical bond between commercial society and the universal archetypes. They don't want humanity to grow up. There's all this talk about global diversity and civilization and culture, and there's none of it. They abuse these words like community and humanity. Humanity hasn't even been born yet. Wake up. It's just a term in a sociological dictionary. While people are on their knees in an infantile, backward, limbic, mammalian, primitive state, crippled with fear, how can you have such a thing as culture? Gandhi asked it, does it even exist? Reich said, can we have it, please? And Lorenz said, yeah, it might be a good thing. Let's try it. But we don't have it yet. Marshall McLuhan goes on to say, Professor Key explained that the proclaimed purpose of the ad may be just such a decoy, so that the ad may do its work at another level of consciousness. Perception, says Key, is total. Everything that happens is perceived in totality. The editing process is somehow accomplished inside the brain, which retains the major proportion of what is totally perceived in some kind of storage over varying periods of time, completely unknown consciously to the individual. All right. You look at a bridge. If you're an architect, you're looking at that totally differently than a guy who's driving a car. If you're an artist who wants to sketch it, every part, the person who works in iron is looking at it differently than the person who works in wood. The person who likes Victorian architecture as opposed to, neoclassical or Art Nouveau or whatever you want, Georgian, Edwardian, it looks at that bridge in a totally different way. So maybe there is no such thing as objective reality, only subjective reality. And maybe it's a force of manipulation and control that wants to homogenize everything. We come from different backgrounds, and those backgrounds and worldly experiences change our perception. But as Carl Jung and others pointed out, even though on the surface you have those divisions, right? As I said, you look at this thing differently depending on your background and your level of experience. Underneath, in your deepest reservoir of the mind and the unconscious, is an archetypal, numinous idea of a bridge that is shared universally. We haven't time to elaborate on it, but those who are familiar with Carl Jung's work know this. The archetypal idea of something is embedded, and that's what these advertisers are working on. So our idea of woman, our idea of man, our idea of children, of animals, of nature, of cold, of hot, of fire, of water, of fear, of God, all of these things are manipulated. The surface stuff is just an attack on us, so that they're trying to dig down and work on the archetypal ideas that are in the race memory of all people. And this is why it's so deadly and so pernicious, which is why the ego defenses, as you're seeing from these quotes, the ego defenses are rendered useless. They stun those out of existence so that they can get at the deeper core self, the soul of a man, and then pummel that into shape. The very symbol of the Fabian society is two men with two giant steam hammers striking the world, striking the globe, pummeling it into shape, the shape of the psychopath. Subliminal advertising and all efforts at thought and behavior control work because we're ultimately victims of thinking, and we're also prisoners of the past. We don't think with the mind as much as for the mind. I've gone into that in my other work. And then, more to the point, we're a herd. George Frederick Hegel couldn't stop talking about it. He enjoyed it. What happens if most of your thinking isn't even personal? Your names are copied. I say my name is Michael. Well, that's hardly original. I say I clean windows for a living, or deep sea dive, or drive a taxi, or I'm a teacher, or I'm a massage therapist. You have to face it. Hundreds of thousands of people can say I kick a football around a field. One man can say I care about the meaning of life. I am the man who cares about being. I am das Ein. The rest is collectivized. And that the collectivized man is already in chains. He doesn't need anybody to come and... All they'll do is replace your chains of iron that you put on yourself with chains of gold, and you say, thank you very much, Master. Hail the system. Praise the overlords. So we have to find out what distinguishes us. In my work, it's never about an active acquisition of this knowledge. It's about a deconstructive, apophatic rendering of this process. Find out all those things that stand between you and the self, which is a little bit of a different kind of thinking. Shamanic people understand it, but for the rest of us in the world, it's quite difficult. It's actually not difficult, but it can be difficult to get in touch with it. Breakdown, forensics, deconstruct. Now, the same forces that openly advocate Puritan ideologies and moral behavior benefit from the inevitable repression of human instincts that come with the acceptance of such anti-natural patterns of behavior and belief. So morality and virtue are very good things. But by over-insisting on it, of course, there's a psychological consequence of the person becoming too grey, too repressed. Then, with the other hand, this is a very cunning dialectic, because you're now so frozen, so indoctrinated, so oppressed from one group of psychopaths, that the next psychopath can come in with all the perversity and all the stimuli and Pied Piper you right into the global village. It starts early, we've been told. There's a wall that's being built, but we are making the mud that's making the bricks that we're handing to the global leaders. That's the problem. Back to a little bit of psychology. When I've been describing that we have this barrage of attack on our mind, then what is the consequence of that? And what forces stand against it? Well, you know what? See, we always bash the ego, but there's only one aspect of our psyche that is able to defend itself, right, without the attack, is the ego, normally. The ego is the place where the defense is, and the superego that defends us against those things that threaten our autonomy. And more than that, the ego is the part of us that seeks for differentiation. You know, when you use that term individualism or independence, to a psychologist, you're speaking the language of the ego, because according to their understanding of the anatomy of the psyche, it is only the ego that seeks for independence, to break out of the collective. So you can understand then why there's such an incredible assault on the ego. In other words, a social persona, Hegel's social persona, where they've been working overtime to make sure that you don't have even a healthy ego. They don't mind if you have a narcissistic ego. They don't mind if you have a social persona. because that's what they want. But the ego, when rightly understood, is this phoenix that's trying to rise out of all that ancestral programming of the past. It doesn't want to completely break from it. It's a natural evolution. It's Aristotle's entelechy. It's something that has to happen. From the seed you grow. Ego means egg. It's the embryo of yourself. But if it's planted on the rock, it's not going to grow. If it's smashed by the hammers of the psychopaths, it is not going to survive. And then, unfortunately, it ties into, I hinted at it earlier, there's two forces that work on the ego. There's the oppression from outside, right? The oppression from the worldly forces that keep you in check, school, parents, dictators, teachers, all of that. And then we have another mechanism, which is the repression, the repression. Our own efforts within our own mind to forget and then forget that we forgot. And all the self-sadism that comes with that. Both these pernicious elements play right into the hands of the dictator. It was summed up by Dr. D.W. Winnicott, who said, if society is in danger, it is not because of man's aggressiveness, but because of the repression of personal aggressiveness in individuals. Packard goes on to say, all this probing and manipulation has its constructive and its amusing aspects, but also I think it is fair to say it has seriously anti-humanistic implications. Much of it seems to represent regress rather than progress for man in his long struggle to become a rational and self-guiding being. Something new, in fact, appears to be entering the pattern of American life with the growing power of our persuaders. Now, the persuaders are collectivists. They're hive thinkers. They're into that groupthink. Joel Bakan, in his very, very important book, The Corporation, says that Chris Hooper, ad director, voiceover artist for McDonald's, Coca-Cola, and many other corporations, says that his job is to create images that are trying to sell products to people that they don't really need, and that encourage very sophomoric behavior, irresponsible, hedonistic, egotistical, narcissistic behavior. That's good cop, bad cop. Repress you on one side and offer you all the stimuli on the other. There's another dynamic as well in this. What's the opposite to freedom? The ego seeks for freedom. It seeks to progress. If it can't do that, you would think that there'd be stasis. No, because nature, they say that nature doesn't like a vacuum. Nature also doesn't allow stasis. So what's the only alternative? Backwards. So civilizations, individuals, they can regress. They can go backwards. We get the hero image in all mythology. And we get it in all television, in the movies. It is one of the most important figures in all literature and fantasy and in real life. Of course, in the media, we're not getting the healthy models. We're getting these over-exaggerated hyper models, hyper-extrovert models. And, of course, it's based on the idea, well, first of all, it's based on the idea that the women may give birth to the children of the world, but the men are meant to organize that world and make it safe for the children to live in. It's a dynamic like that, not to mention other things as well. Now, in the imagery and mythology and in the imagery that's picked up on the media and television, one other dynamic is that everyone needs the father. These fatherly, heroic figures, everyone needs them, everyone relies on them. Because those guys are decisive, dependable, they're prepared, they're unwavering, they're hard, they'll get the job done, they're indestructible. But in the same dynamic, he can't be a hero if he looks like he needs anyone else. It's an interesting dynamic. And of course, these figures are there because all children, all adolescents dream or think about constantly the kind of adults they're going to be. It goes without saying. And so the media must step in to then give you what look like on the surface positive models of what you're going to be when you grow up. It's more pernicious now. In several movies, you'll see the son-father dynamic. In fact, I would go so far as to say in many of the movies, you even have the son saving the father. That's a very subversive, however entertaining it might be, it's a very subversive element or motif. You see it in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and you certainly see it in Back to the Future, in which Marty McFly's real father is a complete and utter dweeb. And his surrogate father is the intelligent, if slightly eccentric, Doc. What does the word Doc imply? Doctor. Right? It's the upstanding, intelligent. So there's a surrogate father involved. And then when his father finally gets up the guts to beat the shit out of the guy who's raping the future-to-be wife, mother, as if by magic, the mother, the girl, now it goes off with McFly. Instantly, the moment he shows physical, hard-bodied prowess, she's as if by magic, she's suddenly enamored with him at the end of the movie. And let's not even get into the whole esoteric occult aspect of the son going back to basically have a relationship with a mother. It's based on the Tsarion and the myth of Horus. Let's not even go there. Of the incest that's implied, mythically, I might add. But Susan Jeffords, in a very important book called Hard Bodies, says that for who is Doc Brown? In fact, her book was called Hollywood Masculinity in the Reagan era, you see. Now, look what she has to say. Who is Doc Brown other than Ronald Reagan himself? This critic tracked the various movies that come out timely as different presidents come in, make their most important changes politically, and then leave. She tracked the kind of movies that simultaneously come out and how they refer and relate to those particular machinations. She says, for who is Doc Brown other than Ronald Reagan himself? He has allied himself with technology in the name of progress, survived an assassination attempt at the hands of one of Reagan's chief targets, Libyan terrorists, acted as a surrogate father, turned to science fiction tales for his inspiration, because in the movie, Doc's childhood reading led him to want to build a time machine, whereas Reagan's viewing of the day the Earth stood still led him to envision his own Star Wars program, fought a future filled with crime, drugs, and idleness, enabled a dysfunctional lower-class movie to improve its wealth and social status. Remember the end of Back to the Future? When there's that transformation? Returned the American family to its values of nurturance and success, and found his own personal history not in the hothouse parlors of the East, but, as you saw in the later movie, in the open spaces of the Wild West. Parallels exactly. Another one where the son saves the father is, of course, Star Wars. He not only saves the father, he saves him from the dark side. The son comes back to save his own father from the dark side. And what is going on in the bigger picture in that movie? The entire universe is trying to escape from an evil father figure, the emperor, the dark side. And counterpointing that perfectly is a young man who leaves his surrogate family, who are a bunch of farmers. He has to leave them to seek and eventually save his own father. This is interesting, not just for film criticism. These are dynamics that exist in these films that go unseen. Incredible counterpointing, incredible juxtaposition. In Rambo, there's an enormous allegiance to the father figure and the surrogate figure father. In Rambo 3, Rambo won't even go and fight any more wars. He actually turns Colonel Troutman down. Colonel Troutman comes and appeals to him to help, and he won't do it. But the moment that Rambo finds out that Colonel Troutman has been captured, he goes to save his friend. He says, the hell with the war, but yep, I'll save my father, I'll save my friend. James Bond and the relationship with M and with Q. There's even it was with Timothy Dalton. It's the one with Timothy Dalton. I don't remember the name of it. In that, Q turns up in Brazil as Bond's uncle, actually. So it even goes further than the patriarchal relationship that he has with M when you see him in the offices, when he goes there to be given an assignment. There's even been instances in which the older men have absolutely posed as father figures, family members. Earlier I mentioned what I was going to talk about, the connection to the loss of the king. Oh, by the way, you are living in an oligarchy, just in case you didn't know that. That's besides the point. We, generally, sociologically speaking, don't worship kings anymore. And a lot of people, especially here in this audience and in America in general, will think that's a good thing. It is, but the point is that psychologically, unfortunately, to the unconscious mind, it's not a good thing. Because after centuries and centuries and centuries of having kingship, that organizes your life for you. You're happy with your change and your infantilism because Lancelot is going to handle it. When you depose that figure historically, things have a tendency to become more unstable. Big Brother knows that. He knows you're missing that archetype. In the same way that a young child might be missing his physical father, you see. It's a very needed archetype psychologically. I mean, you're not going to talk yourself around it. You need it on an emotional, psychological level. That's why it has enormous power over you. And that's why the manipulators know that and use it for just that purpose. The media know all about it. Do you know how many sitcoms there are and story scenarios of motherless families? Where the father is the pillar of rectitude, the mountain, the landowner, the baron, the surrogate king. Star Trek, remember that? Or, take it down to the more pernicious level, that's exactly the ideology, that's exactly the archetypal magnetism, the whole archetypal dynamic that's happening behind all of this politics. It's not to save the sick, it's not to improve society, it's not to build civilization, it's to control your mind. And these male patriarchal creatures who wouldn't know what to do with a round table if they even saw one, or a wigwam, or a sweat lodge, or my boot up their arse. This is the pawn slime who imagine that they are Geronimo. Or they imagine they're the kings. By artificially pushing everybody down, they think they've risen. Spiritually, you haven't moved an inch. Then they know the kids need those. Remember, the kids want to know, what kind of an adult am I going to be? Well, they got a whole slew of trendy, public, people's champions to Pied Piper the kids into that very mode. Modeling excellence, worldly status, competition, and all this sexual, libertarianism and all of this stuff. Copycats, wannabes. Knowing that you're not going to get the sexual fulfillment, but you'll wallow in the frustration of not getting it. One of the other movies that comes to mind, I wish we could go on with this, but, I can only use certain anecdotes, is The Terminator. The Terminator movie is entirely about the family dynamic, in which the machine that in the first movie was there to kill relentlessly, non-stop destruction, will never stop. In the next movie becomes the surrogate mother, while the mother's out there dressed in combat and shooting down doors and blowing cops away. And the Terminator becomes the surrogate. The machine, the cyborg, is the new parent of the future. It ties in with the post-humanism thing. If we have time, we can get into it. And by the way, can somebody remind me how much time we have, Robert? Bloody hell. Okay. And this was brought up because it said that and this is the dialogue in the movie of John Connor's mother watching the Terminator. Actually, the kid, John, is teaching the Terminator something. And the Terminator is sitting there learning something about morality. I can't remember the exact scene. But the dialogue, the voiceover says, watching John with a machine, it was suddenly so clear. The Terminator would never stop, would never hurt him. It would never leave him or get impatient with him. It would die to protect him. Right? All those family qualities, those maternal and paternal qualities. It would die to protect him. Of all the would-be fathers, meaning all the flesh and blood fathers, who came and went over the years, this machine, this thing, was the only one who measured up. And in an insane world, it was the sanest choice. There's that logic again. I am who I am because of everyone. Well, the world is insane, and I've made a sane choice. No, the world is insane, and you've made an insane choice. But look at what's implied in these movies. And, of course, we're just touching on it. We're just touching on this dynamic. Get in and watch the movie. It's incredible. And the twist from the first movie to the second, and how the entire persona of all the characters changes, the body type of the female protagonist. The dynamics between the old Terminator and the liquid, mercurial, up-to-date, upgraded Terminator and the old clunker. Wait a minute, the Schwarzenegger version of the Terminator was the hot stuff in the first movie, and now he's the junker in the second one. But he's the lovable junker. It's the other younger man who, by the way, if you look closely, is actually a version of Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's the son. Well, we can't go into it. The father, the son, it's all over the place. And by the way, I should get extra points because I've watched so many garbage movies to do this presentation and so many garbage commercials that every one of you here is going to have to buy me a beer. Heineken. Actually, I like Bass. It's a really good beer. Or no, Negro Modelo. That's somebody introduced me to that. Only kidding. Eric Seligman goes on to say that in countries, well, here we go again. Fashion. Why? Because everybody, the media is telling you so damn ugly that now everybody is going, to look like this model that they put on television. In countries such as Japan, Vietnam, and Thailand, many people are now undergoing cosmetic surgery to widen their eyes so that they will look more Western. Skin whitening cream sales are soaring all over Asia. That's mind control. Not to mention the whole spate in China right now of obesity and what you have, the insulin, what's it called, the diabetes. As I said, we bring cultures down. They bring cultures down. Hal Becker says, I know the secret of making the average American believe anything I want him to. And just let me control television. You put something on the television, it becomes reality. If the world outside the TV set contradicts the images, people start trying to change the world to make it like the television set images. It's called reality TV. Yeah, because the TV has become your reality. Try having a conversation with somebody today. Before they talk, they're almost scared witless that you've even asked them, is this seat free? Is there somebody sitting here? Then they get out a gadget. It pops out of nowhere, and they're fumbling with this gadget in seconds. Because the art of conversation is not only dead, it's mortified. They look at you with suspicion because you want to talk to them. I mean, people look at me suspiciously anyway, so it's a double deal, right? Vance Packard goes on to say, public relation experts are advertising churchmen how they can be more effective manipulators of their congregations. In some cases, these persuaders even choose our friends for us, as at large community of tomorrow in Florida. Friends are furnished along with the linen. I have to read that one again. Friends are furnished along with the linen by the management in offering the homes for sale. Everything comes in one big glossy package. Finishing off this section, one of the reasons why they're able to control us so much is, do we really know what we want in life? Do the kids really know what adults they want to be? Do we know what we want? Well, the advertisers think no. Advertising Age magazine says in very few instances do people really know what they want, even when they say they do. Do we always tell the truth? It's nice to stand up here and rant on deceivers, but let's tell the truth. No, we don't. Now, so some marketers, says Packard, concluded, you can't assume people will always tell you the truth about their wants and dislikes, even if they know them. What you are more likely to get, they decided, are answers that will protect the informants in their steadfast endeavor to appear to the world as really sensible, intelligent, rational beings. I haven't seen that yet on Jay Leno's walk downtown, but I get the point. So in other words, we have the persona. You see how they've done it? You're not your real self. You're certainly not that hidden observer. You're the persona. You're Hegel's pipe dream. And then you want to reinforce and present that to the world as shining and gleaming and as perfect and as Hollywood as you can get. In comes the advertising matrix and all the other mechanisms of control, and it meets this false persona. That's not even your real self. It's a pseudo-self. And to sustain that, you're in immorality immediately. Because just to sustain that false persona, in other words, to get the cues and affectations from everybody else, because you'd go bloody neurotic if you wouldn't get it, you have to be lying all the time. You're actually lying to yourself, which is the deepest level of it, but we're all lying to one another. And this is then, once the culture is immoral, right? The petri dish, the culture is immoral, then all the various viruses and bacteria will immediately grow at will. So it's an elaborate concept. It is, in fact, a lie mechanism. What do we want? They know we want pleasure without guilt. Partly, that's a good thing, because another word for it is reward. We work hard. We do good. We want a reward. We all want to be more, and we all want to be king size. Anyway, gang, looks like it's slowing down. I think the end is pretty brief, so let me go there. see if we can get through this in 10 minutes. So how far have we come in life in this century, or since America was born? We've understood we're not in a democracy, we're in an oligarchy. We've understood there's a psychic dictatorship. That's great. We know what we don't want. We maybe don't know what we do want. We know that Big Brother has to be brought down, but we don't know exactly how to do it. We got so far as realizing there's an enemy somewhere, and we're healthily working on the process of discovering who the tiger is, how it operates, and hopefully we're not waiting for it to lead us out of the jungle. That's not a good idea. You see, there's two ways to be eaten. One is to be pursued by a shark and swallowed, and the other is to just of your own will float into its jaws and be swallowed while it's standing motionless. Now, the Leviathan that preys over us today has done one before, and it's doing the other now. Obviously, it's a dynamic that involves ignorance versus knowledge, which is a very old principle. And that's why I said earlier, no shortcuts. Nothing else more important. The shopping can wait. In the Gospel of Philip, it says, ignorance is the mother of all evil. In Proverbs 3, it says, the wise will inherit honor. The fools get disgrace. It really is a simple matter of developing those critical, judgmental skills. We don't want less criticism, we want more. And we have to have zero tolerance for any of those forces that try to dumb that down and bypass that. Now, Lewis Lapland, in a book called Money and Class in America, says, no matter how effusive our rhetoric to the contrary, most Americans cannot bring themselves to trust the unaffiliated individual. We prefer to repose our confidence in institutions, a brand name, a corporation, a bank. It is the figure of Babbitt or Cyrus Vance, not Clint Eastwood, who represents the triumph of the American dream. The man who goes along to get along, who knows the right people and belongs to the right clubs, whose every opinion seconds the nomination of the chairman, who submits easily and a winning smile to what de Tocqueville called the tyranny of the masses. Ayn Rand, the philosopher from Russia, said, men have been taught that it is a virtue to agree with others, but the creator is the man who disagrees. Men have been taught that it is a virtue to swim with the current, but the creator is the man who goes against the current. Men have been taught that it is a virtue to stand together, but the creator is the man who stands alone. So what is the unaffiliated person? Can we define that a little bit more? In other work, in German existential philosophy, he's known as the authentic man. In the East, it's known as, a term I've used, is dharmic man, as opposed to karmic man. And what is that? What's that in English? Ignorance versus knowledge. Dharma is when you're in knowledge. Karma is nothing more than ignorance. In other words, it's when you're attitudinally free. The freest men have been locked up in dungeons for as long as 18 years and sometimes longer. I can name many. How about Ezra Pound, for instance? How about Wilhelm Reich? How about Mikhail Bakunin? I could go on. There's a long list. They could not be chained because they were free in here. And they were also self-aware. Now, R.D. Laing, the psychologist, said the only death we seem to recognize is biological death. Gurdjieff said it happens fairly often that essence dies in a man while his personality and his body are still alive. Take a walk around a mall. He didn't have him in his day. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard said the biggest danger, that of losing oneself, can pass off in the world as quietly as if it were nothing. So self-murdered people. When you see images like this, for instance, and we see them a lot, what is it really telling us? Something to do with technology, something to do with post-humanism? What? Why a woman? Why a robot? Why a cyborg? We see this constantly now. Because woman represents nature. Woman represents eros. Woman represents birth. She represents the natural order, what is known as the negentropic order of the universe, self-sustaining, unplugged-in, egoless. But unfortunately, out of control. No rules. She does what she wants. Man has no power over her. Technological man. So the cyborg creature is the technological creature over whom man can be organized. He can program it. He can keep it under control. That's what's being suggested in all of this. The Taoists called her the mysterious female. The technocrats don't like mystery. It's all about control. And the technological creature, the technological man, right, the post-human man, in my work in 2012, I've elaborated on this till I've gone blue in the face, is that the 2012 post-human thing is about the death of humanity, not cataclysms of any kind. It's the death of us, the human part of us, all over the world, or the beginning of that process. And the birth of the transhuman model, the post-human being, who is literally a remote-controlled entity, programmable, organized, orderly, regimented, obedient. And the opposite of that is the feminine model, which exists not only in women, because women can be just as masculine as men. I mean a modality that exists in both people, male and female, have masculine and feminine within them. That always needs to be pointed out. But again, we might turn to say, what kind of mind would want this? What kind of psychopathy has dreamed this up? Once you have moved into this technological sphere, individual destiny is meaningless. You may walk, you may talk, you may think, you may breathe, but you may not exist. You may outsmart all the centuries of people before you. You may run faster, like Steve Austin. You may hear better. You may compute better. You may live forever. But if you don't exist, only human beings have existence. They want to erase that. And the wellspring of existence is the self, that religiously is called the soul. That is what's being corked. That's what's being strangled. That's what's being mutilated daily. That's why the rivers of creativity are running dry. And they're going to give you prolonged life as a nice payment for that. They can have it. Lang says, from the alienated starting point of our pseudo-sanity, everything is equivocal. Our sanity is not true sanity. Their madness is not true madness. Our normal adjusted state is too often the abdication of ecstasy, the betrayal of our true potentialities, that many of us are only too successful in acquiring a false self to adapt to these realities, the pseudo-self. This is the problem. Jeremy Griffith says that R.D. Lang was spot on when he said that humans live with 50 feet of solid concrete between themselves and the true world of their soul. Eric Fromm says, in fact, it is the fully sane person who feels isolated in an insane world. And he may suffer so much from the incapacity to communicate that it is he who may become psychotic. Sound familiar? Sound familiar, anybody? The fully sane person is driven to insanity because he can't adjust to a sick and demented, perverted, psychotic world. And don't we see what's happening with this TV generation? What, after all, is the fallout? We have the gangs. We have the hate. We have the underworld. Again, we have the darker elements coming out. We have the tribalism. Because if you don't give them the family, right, and the family is broken, and society is broken as these kids subconsciously understand it to be, then you're going to have all of this other surrogate versions of the same thing. If you're living in a social gulag, because where are gangs known to exist? Prisons. Well, if you're living in a decorated incarceration, expect this kind of behavior. And there's many kinds of gangs loose in the world. There's many kinds of collectivism. We have another one now with this Obama and what he was doing during the election. What was that, if not the same hive mentality, hive think? But the psychologists know it goes even deeper than that. Fromm says that hate as a relation to objects is older than love. It derives from the narcissistic ego's primordial repudiation of the external world with its outpouring of stimuli. As an expression of the reaction of unpleasure evoked by objects, it always remains in an intimate relation with the self-preservation instincts. In other words, he's saying that if you don't have the love, if you don't have the eros, if you don't have the mystery, if you don't have the passion, the vitality, the elan vital, if you don't have that in you, you will have something else. You will have necrotic energy. Mentally. That's what you're seeing in the world today. That's what 2012 is really all about. Deconstruction. Dr. Eric Sigmund says in the book Remotely Controlled, I'm convinced that television does indeed cause at least half of all the murders in the industrialized world. And we finish on this, ladies and gentlemen, and we can go out and enjoy the rest of the day. And you can buy me that bloody beer you promised. Twisted your arm for, I mean. And of course, I've gone into this next part in great detail in a thing I'm doing called Disciples of the Mysterium, but we'll just keep it brief. As I say, I won't lay anything heavy on you this time. And it's this quote, Zen, the Taoist quote, that says that eternity is the time it takes to know everything. What do I mean by this? Obviously, something's up with all the education and scientism of our world. Because, restated, what I mean is this. You have one life to live, and it's kind of short. You have an imperfect reason, which even the scientists agree is flawed and imperfect. But you have infinite things to know. Hasn't everybody bothered wondering about the monstrosity of that equation? So you either say, well, then we're not going to know everything, but that changes the complexion. What I mean is that an individual has to say, I then, in my lifetime, I'm not in a position to know everything, which, by the way, changes the complexion of everything in our reality. Completely, if you think about it. Or you say, as the Taoists, mystics, shamans have always been telling you, you can, in fact, know everything, but you're not going to do it with the circuitry that you now use, and you're not going to do it by listening to what Big Brother has to say. In other words, you have to open another sphere of intelligence. Sigmund Freud put it into these words. He said, you must give yourself over to the oceanic experiences. Experiences that involve the whole self, the whole mind. And a very deep, of course, it implies, obviously, the ocean. It implies a mutable, unchanging, ever-changing, mutable, unfixed state of consciousness. Not the Archimedean points that the philosophers and the scientists are looking for, but an intimate daily rapport, a relationship between good and evil, darkness and light, male and female, masculine and feminine, yin, yang, nature and being, mind and world, every single day, renewing yourself constantly, renewing your idea of yourself constantly, because that fixed, immutable idea of yourself is what makes you hostile to every other creature who comes along to contradict that vision of yourself. And then you're doing that to him as well, and to her. This image of ourselves that is so unsustainable is the very thing we're trying to defend. And then, as we've shown, we now find out that that's a concocted phantasmagoria created on Madison Avenue. Why defend that? And then you wonder why he says civilization is in ruins. Wilhelm Wildebrand said it another way. He divided it into two words you should really know. Ideographic and nomothetic. An ideographic experience is a meaningful event or experience which can never be replicated. The Taoists say you cannot step on the same piece of water twice. Bruce Lee said you cannot even own yourself. How can you hope to own anyone or anything else? Every day the sky is painted a different color. Every leaf is different. Every snowflake unique. And we want global villages. Meaningful events or experiences which cannot be replicated or understood with general absolute rules or codes, because they do not. Or what we all have is nomothetic experiences which are perfectly replicatable and scientifically verifiable. They'll have their verification. And finally, Dr. W. Winnicott, the psychologist, said, can you see the one essential way in which science and intuition contrast with each other? True intuition can reach, while true intuition can reach to it, to the whole, while truth in a flash, whereas in the science, the whole truth is never reached. In other words, in science, you're only going to know the modules and the parts, and that's healthy. We need it. I'm not deriding it. But intuition, as the Teslas and the Walter Russells and the great minds, right, will always tell you, I mean, this has happened even with the guys at Microsoft, they'll have to admit this, the intuition jumps that and sees the entire conception of a thing. That's creation. The other is just recreation or invention. There's a difference. And we'll finish now, and as I'm getting off stage and closing down the computer, I'll just play you one clip that I have from a movie that basically emphasizes this collectivism and individualism dynamic. And we'll let you leave the room while I'm showing it. So just take a breath for a second while I find it. Here we go. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your time. It's appreciated. See you again.
School. I hated it to the core of my being, but there was other things going on with me existentially, so these had taken those classes and recommended, go down. It's good to just move the mind a bit and get the mind, sort of active, because we were in a state of total stasis. And I was so desperate, to think, and just move the mind and just get out of the rut. I actually did go down to this college and signed on for the class. And in its own sense, it was one of the most important things I ever did, Really important. But they didn't cover Heidegger in that course at all. It was just a beginning.
Was it more sort of analytic?
Yeah, they covered almost all the the major philosophers people would know about, like Plato, Aristotle, and Descartes, of course, and Hume, and Kant, and Nietzsche played a big role. Things like that. Moving up to like modern people like Peter Singer. And the next year, I took pretty much the identical class. And it was through discovering all of the flaws, in an extremely rudimentary way. First of all, I'm not a degreed philosopher or even an expert in the subject by any strength of the imagination. My work is entirely syncretic. But through talking with colleagues and then reading subsequently on the subject in America, it became quite obvious even to me, with what little knowledge I had, that a lot of these analytical philosophers, they were like talking up a gum tree. A lot of it was just completely not making sense. But philosophy has this tremendous aura of untouchability, and these are the highest intellects in some sort of, Star Trek thing where there's voices in the clouds, the all-seeing, all-powerful minds. And of course, again, in academia, this is very much emphasized. But yet the sort of spirit of individualism within me was, had enough guts to say, no, this doesn't make sense. And especially with people like Descartes, who are champions not just in a philosophical context, but their theories have permeated down into politics and all other sorts of areas of life. The treatment of animals, the man against the machine, and then more important ideas of like the collective versus the individual. These kinds of things.
And the dualism of mind and body.
Yes, very much so.
Separation of that.
Yeah. And in many ways, it's more than just a dualism. Because in Descartes, if you really read Descartes, he had already subdivided body from mind, which is the obvious one, but then world and God as well. There's like, once you've started one form of dualism, it just continues in this hideous inverted tree, And then they set about trying to reconcile all of these, disparate, aspects of their philosophy. And it almost is, okay, wait a minute here, am I getting this wrong? But did you already artificially create these divisions? And then you go through this elaborate process of trying to glue them back together like some kid playing with a jigsaw or a broken toy. Is that really philosophy? And so finally, when I start reading Heidegger, he was asking these same questions. It took 5 years to even understand what he was saying at all. In fact, I could say up to about 5 years reading his own work, I had no clue what the man was talking about at all. And my understandings of his work came through other commenters first. And also, what intrigued me about him was that he was such an expert on the great German poets, and Hölderlin, and on Rilke, and some of the existential poets. Rilke being from Prague originally, but lived for a long time in France. And these were people that I was up on. My tradition coming more from the poetic side, and so to have a philosopher like Heidegger who drew so heavily on the poets, meant that I would have to continue the process of discovering what he said. And if you don't speak German, of course, even philosophers know that's a problem with Heidegger because it's probably better to understand him in the idiom. So the etymology and the drawing on philology. So all of these were handicaps which would have normally put another person off. But within Heidegger's work is such an incredible, mellifluous, poetical, antinomian, voice. Which to me, later on, I'd know how to define it more. Oh, this smacks of Taoism, this smacks of even aspects of Jainism. Now, I'll be able to put a language to this later. At the time, it was a completely raw, primitive thing where this fella's saying something, you know, stick around, keep penetrating it. I knew to stick around. And even though I was a novice in philosophy, I had come from other traditions, like I said, the poetical and mystical occult. So I never, when I read Hegel, when I was reading, I go to these academic classes when I started learning philosophy. However, I was different than all the students and pupils in there. I may not have had the strict academic philosophical background, but I had an occult background. So it was no difficulty for me then to read the Hegels and the Descartes and all of these people in both a religious, theological understanding, and more than that, a hermetic, would probably be more accurate to call hermetic. And then later on, lo and behold, you actually find out that many of these actual philosophers were themselves. I mean, this was a surprise. I didn't realize it at the time. But the Hegels and the Schopenhauers were very much enamored. This goes even for Nietzsche. Were either highly influenced or at least deeply involved in studying these other traditions. So in fact, rather than feel alienated from reading their work, slowly even a greater bond happened. And if that had not have taken place, then there would have been no way to really get into Heidegger's work at all. Because one of the actual avenues, there's several avenues into the work of Heidegger. One is from the strict philosophical point of view. The other is from the existential point of view. The other is from the linguistic point of view. We can maybe talk a bit about that aspect, you know, people use that as a way into his work. And believe it or not, the other one is a mystical way in. He may have never said that or admitted it in so many words, but it nevertheless is the case that the Book of Tea and the Tao Te Ching, right, and other Oriental philosophies certainly, you know, influenced his work.
I think he said that it was a book by Suzuki. He said everything you said in there, that's how I've been trying all my life to say.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it didn't come out as strongly, but he was known to have read these works. They were on his desk, and basically he never denied it. You know, Heidegger's famous for never admitting anything, right? But again, that's his own idiosyncrasy, and that should be respected rather than condemned. You know, I consider him a very deep thinker, and certainly has changed my life profoundly. Because if a philosopher doesn't change your life intimately, individually, you know, I really fail to see the point of studying them, reading them, teaching them. You know what I mean? It becomes a completely a food for the mind type of affair. But let's just maybe talk about the linguistic aspect. George Steiner, you know, and other people who've been very helpful. So people coming to Heidegger for the first time, but have a background in linguistics. For those who come into Heidegger for the first time, and have a background in linguistics, then the George Steiner work, by getting into the philology of Heidegger, is very important. And what I only know about the linguistic aspect is that Heidegger was really concerned with Sprach, the speech. And this is one of the poetic elements of his work that hypnotized me so much. In his later life, he even emphasized that there's a very difference between chit-chat, which is what everyone does, and Sprach, which is the speaking. And in true speech, when you're speaking about philosophical ideas, and this is almost Socratic in the way he puts it, is that also even the pauses between what you say, the silence in between, is part of the speaking, is part of the enunciation. This is magnificent, you know. But more technically speaking, he was a man who basically had problems with every philosopher in the whole philosophical tradition from the time of Plato, including Plato. He was more forgiving with pre-Socratic philosophers, but had endless problems with Aristotle and Plato and the whole tradition. He loved the Greek language, and he believed that many of the Greek terms, because Greek was the first, well, this is arguable, but for technical purposes, Greek was the first language to work in philosophy. Many of the words of philosophy come from Greek, like onto and all of this. And he believed that there was already contamination in the outset regarding the language of Greek and its application. This is a linguistic thing, and I don't have time to go into it deeply. And he believed that the culprits were these Athenian philosophers. And to speak very broadly about it, he believed that Aristotle and Plato had taken philosophy off into a completely other direction, and it was no longer philosophy. And he said that it's because in metaphysics and in philosophy in general, the real meaning of life is to do with being and existence. And that they had sort of stepped past that. They use those terms, they speak about it. But in their mind, and again, I'm not using Heidegger's words here, I'm using my words. I have to emphasize that these are my interpretations of Heidegger. I'm not a Heideggerian expert or anything like that. He would, in my words, I interpret Heidegger to have meant that these Socratics, as well as all the philosophers that stem from them, and including their refuters, are interested in with what is called essences. There is actually a big controversy, a dichotomy in philosophy about existence versus essence. And this turns up time and time again in the work of Heidegger, because which came first? It's like the chicken and the egg type of concept, right? To put it very simply. And essences is basically that which you can't see with your senses. And of course Heidegger would critique this. But to put it in simple terms, is that an essence is obviously, like for instance God is an essence. God is obviously not hiding or lurking behind the clouds. He's not hiding in the woods somewhere. I've described it in the article. He's not hiding in a cave waiting to be discovered by some Indiana Jones type. He's a concept of the mind. He's people's abstraction, saying, oh, we think this all, came about through some primal cause or omnipotent intelligence. So basically, without talking religious terms, then that's an essence. And there's many other kinds of essences as well.
It does really begin with Plato with the form.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Now, Plato had this heavily. Plato's work was imbued with all of this. Now, don't forget, the first person who comes to Plato, and it depends how you come to Plato. If you're coming to Plato through a theological background, you're going to love Plato. Because on paper, it sounds wonderful. It sounds absolutely wonderful. That all reality is an illusion. And behind it is the real, which he called the forms, which are archetypes. Somebody would go, oh, I understand that. That's the antitypes, the archetypes, the forms. Yes, but then, okay, in book after book after book, including the Republic, he never nails down what these forms are. He doesn't explain them in any type of detail. We've never been able to find them, and in 2,000 years, we haven't made a single ounce of progress to discover what these so-called forms are. So again, they were a hypothetical construct, which I describe as a mysterium. That's a singular word meaning mystery, mysteria meaning the plural of that. And I believe that the world, that's why I did this article and DVD, is because I believe that the world is mysteria haunted. Right? It's a philosophical concept. And Heidegger would have said that this all begins with the Platonics. Because even though it sounds wonderful and ever so mystical and ever so holy and ever so promising of a final eventual enlightenment, that once you are able to contact this forms, or once they contact you, the whole simile of it, once you come out of the cave, come out of ignorance, this is all wonderful, this is all romantic. And when it's these holier-than-thou, toga-wearing, Athenian thinkers, this has an enormously hypnotic, it's a huge sell. Until Heidegger comes along with the bad news that it's all a bunch of bunk. But by that time, the rational school had already basically foundered. By the time of Heidegger and the existentialists, the rationalists had died under their own weight. So his job was slightly made a bit easier. Nietzsche is basically the man who put he's like the Clint Eastwood, come on sucker, puts the bullet through the forebrain. Heidegger was the burial guy. He's the guy who dug the grave and covered it over. And Kierkegaard in there, as well, to a certain extent. But who was it say? Somebody said that, until they had read Nietzsche, I think it was like the dawn on the horizon or something like that. Somebody, it was Copplestone or somebody said that unless you've read Nietzsche, it was like the sun had finally risen on the horizon of understanding or something like that. And it's so true. And this tradition, of course, carries on even in Aristotle, who appears on the surface to be a very practical, rational disciple of reason. But in many ways, Heidegger would critique him too, because even the reason of philosophers is a mysterium to a degree, or an essence. To be more specific, Heidegger would have said, there is something that comes before thought, or there is something that is an object of thought that should be thought about, and that is existence. And this has certainly never been given anything like the thought it really deserves. What does he mean by this? It's the whole essence existence thing again, but restated in a way. Obviously, in order to think, okay, let's take it in stages. Descartes addressed somewhat of the same question. What can I know? I see the world. I see the world around me. I see the shapes and forms. I have an idea of myself, but I can see a candle looking like a real candle, but if it melts, it looks like wax. Are those one and the same thing? Clearly, they're not. So I do see things, but my senses could be deceived. You know, I could see sheets of ice. You know, the whole landscape could be covered in snow. Am I aware that those are made up of individual snowflakes? Of course not, but they are, right? So again, it depends on perspective. So he started then to say, you know, I have to basically start with doubting everything I know. And very quickly, Descartes' procedure was, oh, wait a minute, if there's a doubter, there must be a thinker, and if there's a thinker, there must be existence. And so he came across his definition of existence through this idea of cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Heidegger was dealing very much with the same concepts, but in a different way. And this is without, by the way, getting into all the other sub-critiques of Descartes. We'll just jump over those right now and return to Heidegger. He was saying that, look, before you can think, you must exist. In fact, he described it again in poetic language by saying that being opens a door for thinking, or even thinking opens a door for being. You can see it either way. By thinking about the wrong things, you're not thinking. It's very German, it's very existentialist, I know. But you know, this is, to me, this is extremely profound. By not thinking about what thinking should be thinking about, you're not thinking. And the ultimate goal of thinking, which another philosopher would call an object of thought, is existence. No one today is thinking about existence or being, right? Because you're not thinking about existence and being, you're actually not really thinking at all. And therefore, Heidegger had a multiplicity of ways of describing that inauthentic, to use a very broad existentialist term, inauthentic state of consciousness that he subdefined as being das Man and all these other terms that are sort of irrelevant for this dialogue here. But he basically divided man, as Kierkegaard did, into the authentic and inauthentic individual. And the inauthentic individual is thinking, but he's thinking about, you know, things that are not important in a philosophical sense. And then, relating to what we've just been saying in the last lot of minutes, he includes that to be the highest philosophers of the land. The greatest philosophers who ever lived, he puts into that same category, perhaps for slightly different reasons, but nevertheless, he put them all in that category. A guy like that's not going to make any, he's not going to be invited to too many parties, and he's not going to have too many friends. So this describes, you know, the backlashing against Martin Heidegger. He said that thinking opens a door for being to enter. He really often spoke in terms of being in the German as a presence, as an actual thing. It's a, you know, a real thing. But to stick more to what he was saying, when you are thinking about existence, and he then even changed, again, he changes the terminology. He moves from saying you think about being to that you care for being. He changed the term. In German it's Sorge, right? It's a profound sense of caring. Other people would call it loving, and of course then we have all the baggage that that word has, so we never use it. Caring is a far deeper word. In fact, Thomas Moore, the author, pointed out that the word cure, which meant priest, is the equivalent of the word care. And in Thomas Moore's work, he said that at a time of great grieving, like at a death of a parent or grandparent, everyone gathers, everyone dresses in black, everyone is somber, and everyone's in deep grief. The cure, or the priest, is there to remind you of the presence of death. And not that they're actually doing this, of course, the Christians, but that's the theory. And the higher theologians know this. He's there to be the presence behind the grieving, to say all is sorrow, sab hei dukkam, you know. And he's the one you rest on or you turn to say, Father, what is this all about? All is suffering, all is... So the presence of the cure is to remind you, wake up from the cups and the saucers, like Rilke has so beautifully described. Get up from the table, walk out and find the church that your fathers forgot. Answer the call of being. Theology, of course, has abused this. So have the philosophers, according to Heidegger. Let's bring it back. Bring back the intense awareness of the care of your existence. How it becomes existentialism is why I'm most intrigued, personally, is because he's saying care about your existence. Do not contaminate what I'm saying with the care of humanity's existence, brother, next door neighbor, the underprivileged, the oppressed, whatever. We're talking only in existential terms here about your own profound relationship with yourself, if that's even possible, which Heidegger doubted because he had a whole class of people who can't do this, the inauthentic das Man. He was under no illusions about it. Neither was Sigmund Freud, by the way. But the point being that keep this private. Because it's not your beingness, your sense of existence is really ultimately not the same as others. Later on in the second part of Being in Time, he spoke more broadly about mass movements, you know, and how we are kindred. So he wasn't an existentialist in the hardcore tradition. He also talked about all of mankind's responsibility for this. But in the earlier works, he was very much focused in a strictly, you know, you wake up to the power and the significance of your own life and your own existence. And you do that also in a way that involves facticity, you know, wake up to your own existence. And on a recent interview on Red Eyes Creations, I tried to give a few, it was very brief so we couldn't get into it, that might even involve people to do certain meditations. You know, in fact, it might even take a physical visitation. I mean, literally for a person to go back to the street and look at the front door of the house in which they were born. Of course, a lot of this can be done mentally. Lie in bed one day and just think of your whole life from the beginning, from day one, the cot that you were born in, the smell of the blanket, you know, the pencil that you wrote with in school, all the various smells and odors that you knew, what it felt like to see an animal for the first time, what it was like to be transfixed by a painting. All those experiences, the feeling of water on your hands, hot and cold, pain, sorrow, you know, the light coming through the window, whatever. These existentialistic visions are not collective. Somebody will say, oh, what they are. Everybody has an experience of fire and water. From Heidegger's point of view, that's irrelevant. No, you are the one who had the experience, and that particular experience is absolutely unique to you. It's only later on, because you have to coexist with other people, and you have to seek approval from those people, and you have to wear a social mask, that then you lose your center and selfhood and the uniqueness of these experiences. I always point to the movie Fearless, which I believe is from beginning to end an entirely Heideggerian film. There's others as well. And in which the person has now been re-identified through a death experience. In Heidegger's later work, of course, he talked about being unto death as being one of the critical factors that brings you back into the presence of existence or being, is what it was first coined by Kierkegaard, which is the being unto death, which in simple layman's terms is just the feeling of mortality. The Damocles sword that you know is finite. Your life is going to end one day. And this will give tremendous lucidity. And it will stop this chit-chat. And it will stop this irrelevancy that exists in all people's lives. It's facticity again. Death is inevitable. Of course, he'd hope, as all Taoists and philosophers hope, that it would go to the level you're talking about, where a person would have a daily, momentarily cognizance of death imminently. Yeah, you're talking about 1 in 300 million people, right, who may have that. And even then, they may not have it in an authentic way. It may be a paranoid, neurotic. There's many neurotics all over the world who go, I never stop thinking about that. Yeah, because you're afraid to die. That's a different thing. No. Seeing life and death in a philosophical way is a very Taoist thing, because they're acting all the time on one another. You can't have one without the other.
It's the polarity between birth on the one hand and death on the other, and the mysterious current of life.
Sufis, for instance, say that between each breath is a pause. Right? You have life, you have the death, and then new breath. So it's literally there in everything, is the so-called death. That word is so loaded, of course. And this is why Heidegger was, like I said before, you can enter his work through, if people are interested in linguistics, because he was a real wordsmith, in the sense that he altered and changed words in this way in order to create a new language to describe things that are so contaminated that we simply can't understand what he meant, or a good philosopher like him, because the word is so loaded with prejudice. So he literally tried to coin his own language, and most academic commenters on Heidegger applaud him, think he did a good job. Yeah, some critics, but you know, the intelligent people think he did a wonderful, wonderful job, including using this word Das Ein. Das Ein is the man who's awakened to thinking about existence or caring for existence. He used this term Das Ein, as opposed to another kind of man who couldn't give a monkey's about it. They're called Das Mann, and that meant not just an individual man, the hollow man of T.S. Eliot, but the mass man as well. It had two terms. The they, yeah, in German, exactly. And you see, the other fascinating thing for me, as I said or hinted earlier, is that I was unable to understand Heidegger in his own idiom. But what I did understand, I was relating because of the other paradigms I'd been long exposed to, like art. For instance, for all my favorite artists were surrealists, like Ryney Magritte and Salvador Dali and Giorgio de Chirico and all these people. And they are putting into painting or putting into aesthetics the teachings of these great existentialists. So, and same with the poets like Rilke and all this. And not only that, but even in modern movies, I think Heidegger has, you know, people should realize just how important his philosophies are in music, even in many rock bands, and certainly in modern movies. It's part of the reason why, you know, I wanted to start doing this work more publicly at this aspect of my own life, is because I see it so much now, you know, and this existentialism permeated into literature. We couldn't have a Hermann Hesse. You couldn't have a Colin Wilson. You know, you really would be handicapped today. You know, the whole outsider, Steppenwolf, you know, loner type of individual, this idiosyncratic loner type, is all the product of these kinds of thinkers. Okay, we know it more in fiction, but it actually started somewhere. He was speaking about a very caring thing, in a way, a sort of compassion that no Christian has ever come close to. You know, although he probably hate that word. Again, care, this deep sense of awareness, but tried not to broaden it so that it becomes collective. You can't care for another person. You can't love another person. This is all nonsense. First of all, you can't have it if you don't have it for yourself, right? This is just another important point. But talking about the dread and the being unto death, he said, of course, people in later life, it's not going to hit the 20-year-old who's partying from morning to night, but it's certainly going to hit older people will start gaining this. Or if you have a major tragedy in your life, or you happen to be of a very philosophical bent. But the masses are never going to be involved in this. But the philosophical person who starts to realize their own mortality, he's obviously said, but he said it in philosophical language, that gives you imminence. You become very aware of, you know, the finiteness of your life. In poetical terms, how this is expressed, and this is again one of the most things that you know, affected me so deeply, again because the background was from art, is that then what about the inanimate? If you're really present, doesn't the light on that vase and the existence of this table matter? The chair I'm sitting in is just a dead thing that just happens to fit your ass, and the door handle just happens to be a thing you open to the door. And the great sculptor Henry Moore would have perked up at this point, because Henry Moore, from birth to death, kept talking about how people just relate to things functionally. This is a man who created a sculpture, you know, a beautiful nude, because the hills in the background had the same shape. So if this is going to be in a museum courtyard, he's already thinking about the topography around. That's Heidegger. That's existentialism. That's the understanding of the microcosm and the macrocosm. We have no conception of this. We'll sit behind a cubicle for 60 years. You know, we'll be suit and tie and, you know, just complete prisoners without even noticing it, right? So again, to speak in aesthetic terms, he would say, like William Blake had said so beautifully in ages past, is not the rain, the wetness of the tiles, the dew on a horse's back, the leaf blowing down the street, human? It might even be more human than you imagine yourself to be, because existentially speaking, if you're a Das Man, maybe you don't even deserve that term human, and even other inanimate things have more humanity than you do, because they are present, they're in the now. So the thing that really interested me and really motivated me to keep studying him was this thing about the inanimate, because independently and privately I'd come to the same conclusion. And that is, we become so dependent on other human beings because we seek the approval. We need their cues and affectations. Then, unfortunately, like all the psychologists have so many times pointed out, and then you don't get it, because, of course, you may want something, doesn't mean that life's going to respond. So the child growing up wants the approval of X, Y, and Z, finds out that, okay, it doesn't come on cue, and then you have the inevitable neuroses, which arises when you don't have the approval of other people. And then you have the psychic breakdown. This is one of the things that makes you a non-human being. Is because by not receiving what you think you need, because you're now so dependent on others, and if they don't give you the cues and affectations back, because you're too fat, you got pimples on your face, you know, you speak funny, you know, whatever it might be, we know all this stuff. When you don't get that, then you become a neurotic individual. And by becoming a neurotic individual, why this was so interesting to me, from a conspiratorial point of view, why it plugged into that, is because what happens to the neurotic individual? He becomes vulnerable to control from above. So people who think this digression into Heidegger is just, what the hell's Tsarion on about now? He's, you know, got nothing else to do but this. It's fundamental to the whole understanding of the matrix or architecture of control. Because that neurotic individual who's become not only fixated on expectation, fixated on goals, fixated on the approval of other people, who will now conform and do anything to get that approval, meaning weaken his sense of self to the point where it doesn't even exist, etc., etc., etc. Demand other people around him, including his most intimate people in his life, to do the same thing to receive that approval. who will play games with other people to say, if you're not giving me the approval, I'm not going to give it to you, and then we have the normal dysfunctional relationships. All of this is basically creating the mud that creates the bricks to build the global village and the New World Order. Now, Heidegger didn't go down there and stuff like that. He was an academic, and he kept his critiques of humanity in a philosophical context. But that doesn't mean that other people can't come along and take a philosopher's work and apply it in other areas, you see. So this was very, very important. So with one level, I was intrigued by what he was saying, and you could interpret it as he did in this beautiful poetic way. And by the way, just as an anecdote, when Heidegger spoke in the classroom, the entire college would be outside the door and lining the hallways, including the teachers, to listen to the way that he spoke, the way he used language, and the way he explained the most simplest things. It was absolutely unique in the world, and it absolutely stupefied people. Nobody had ever heard this before. The use of language, the way that he put you into contact with all that invisible, inanimate things. What's the light doing? The light's changing every 5 minutes. The clouds pass. You know, you are here, but you're not aware of that you're here, you know. And all of these other anecdotes that he so wonderfully brought out. This was intriguing to people. It took philosophy in a completely other direction. And of course scared the bejesus out of all these New Yorkers and other, you know, people who thought they were the hegemony in philosophy, you know. So this is tremendous. But the other aspect was this whole idea of the breaking of dependency. You can't come to selfhood if you are utterly transfixed by the levels of approval and status quo of other people. Then if we shift gear a bit and talk about that, Heidegger also, his ultimate metaphysic was that there is a reality, but you're never going to find it. First, if you don't have the care for being, that's fundamental. But even leaving that aside, you're never going to find it expressly through the operation of reason. Oh, don't say that. Well, the philosophy is based on that. What are you talking about now? He said, I've already told you that thinking is later. It's one stage later than existence. Reasoning is one stage later yet again. How can reason ever know its parent? Any more than a baby at 3 can understand that its mother has her own name, she's dated X, Y, and Z, she likes this kind of perfume, she has her own life. It's impossible. The child only sees an image of the mother in relationship to its own needs. It cannot understand what parenthood is or any of these other things. So in the same way, reason is inadequate. Reason is brilliant. All philosophers have the highest respect for reason. But the Heideggers of the world will always remind you, and I put it in these words: you have one life to live, and you have infinite things to know. Stop right there. Do you not see the contradiction? You have infinite things to know, but you have temporary time to know it, and you admittedly, the highest scientists admittedly tell you, and the reason by which you're going to know things is limited in of itself. I think we got problems here. I think we need to have a roundtable meeting in the whole world over this point. Do you mean to tell me that I might have existed for 30 years or whatever many years, and you never told me that there's an inherent contradiction in all of this? Then maybe the Taoists are right. Maybe the Heideggerians are right. That they posit that there possibly is an all-knowingness, but it's certainly not going to happen through the aspects of reason, by the simple, clear fact that you have one short life to live, an imperfect reason that can be mistaken, and yet you have infinite things to know. So the only answer is you're either going to not know everything, which totally radically changes everything we're about, or you can know everything, but you can't necessarily use the road of reason, and also science and technology, which are based on reason.
This is what you said regarding scientism, not being able to give the
Right.
definitive life.
Scientism is a perfect way to express it, because otherwise people think you're bashing science. I'm not bashing man's technical abilities. We're talking philosophy here. We're not critiquing, in fact, everything we've got. Painting a picture, riding a horse, creating a fishing net to catch fish, putting up a tent, obeying the climate when your tribe moves is all technology, technicalness. It's a technical ability. Making the cell phone, making the computer, making the camera. When Heidegger was expressing technology, he was speaking about a different kind of thing. He was speaking about a kind of thought process, a mechanical, fixed, immutable thought process that people can have their reason become. He wasn't against reason, but he was saying, what is guiding reason? If care of being, if das Ein is not guiding reason, then reason will get into all sorts of problems. And he would have pointed even to the great champions of reason as being the men who got into the problems, ergo Kant and Hegel and all of these people. And he wasn't the first to say that. In other words, to make it simple, the disciples of reason, that I call the disciples of the Mysterium, crumbled under their own weight. They are the first to show you that their systems were unsustainable. Heidegger would have said, there you go, that's what I'm talking about when I say that reason operating on its own is incapable to have all-knowing. Maybe then you might have to say all-knowing is impossible. But if we say that, then, my God, the whole complexion of human existence and history dramatically changes. And it's also dangerous to say that, because then you're into the whole world of Hegel and the scientism, who says, we've been telling you that for years. One man can't have all-knowing. So it's a chain of men down through history. Now that's tantamount to saying the individual is but a domino in an endless chain of faceless scientists, faceless technicians. We're into the world of H.G. Wells, and again we're back to Big Brother again, rubbing his hands, going good, right? The faceless scientist. Okay, yeah, around Einstein and others, we have a cult of personality, but that's irrelevant. In factual terms, the scientist is absolutely anonymous. He's basing his science on previous scientists. Another person will take up the baton, right, and carry on. And so what we have here is collectivism incorporated. And I really tried to emphasize this in the work that we did, because then you have collectivism smuggling itself in. Because if knowledge, final enlightenment, utopia, revelation, social justice, social perfection, if all of these things are found in time through evolution, progress, etc., then you're no better than Calvinism, you're no better than the behaviorist model, you're no better than the rational model, and I like to use this term scientism, because as I said, I'm not bashing science, but the essence, the ideology, scientism is the ideology that scientists have, whether they express it or not. Behind science is an idea that progress comes tomorrow after the selfless sacrifice, the altruistic, personless discovery of all of these mini test tubes dressed in white to come to this final revelation. It's no better than the religion. In fact, that's what scientism is. It's a theology of science. And this is what Heidegger was critiquing, because it's preposterous. Henry Bergson and others had critiqued it in their own way before. The Taoist sage sits in his shack and says the same thing. Oh, he says, there is all-knowingness. There's a complete understanding of the totality, but it's not in time. So then you have to then get into a philosophical critique of what is time, which Heidegger did beautifully in the later parts of Being and Time. But my reading of it is simple. Let's keep it very simple. If you don't really understand that there is a complete way for you, like the ancient shamans understood, like the Druids understood, you can in fact come to all-knowingness, but it's in a way that has never been defined in modern times. Certainly the science is not defining it. And more, even let's take it even one level more simply than that. Science is all about Archimedean points. Just like Plato, they want to find that adamantine platform from which you can phallically view the whole world of reality from a fixed point. Fixed laws, right? They invent them, so in my work they're a mysterium, because they just invent it from their mind when they feel like it. David Hume, you only have to go to David Hume to realize that none of this, the entire basis of science is utterly hypothetical, because the 1700s philosopher David Hume shows that causality is purely an assumption. It's a hypothetical construct, right? But in this seek for certainty, in this seeking for, what would you call it, the paradigm, you know, cracking the code as they put it themselves, you know, the God cipher, everybody trying to find the back door into reality, is already what I call mysterium generated, because reality has one thing, the true reality has one hallmark, one indisputable fact. It changes every minute. And therefore there can be no fixed understanding of reality. Bruce Lee, in one of his movies, put it this way. He says, each moment changes you. You cannot even know yourself. How can you hope to hold or know anyone or anything else? The true existential person is very cognizant of that change and all the things that cause this change. Moods come into it, emotions, experiences. Again, pointing to the movie Fearless, this person eating a strawberry has lived 100 lives. So if you watch this one scene, just in the biting and eating of a strawberry, Peter Weir is showing you what I'm talking about. T.S. Eliot would call it, at the still point, the dance is. That is where the dance is, at the still point. And this can be found in all the deepest shamanic traditions. So the point is that his refutation of science is that we need science for its pragmatic purposes. Wonderful. Building houses and, you know, jet planes and all of these things. But the scientism that belies it is telling you that everything is coming in the future, because they've understood this. Subliminally, they've understood that you can't have all-knowing. So they give you this panacea. This is the carrot. Tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow. And my interest is then under that auspices comes in the tyranny, comes in the social tyranny, and also comes in the mental tyrannies as well. And then, of course, you can't be critiquing things without giving the alternative. So my work is then to try and give people that, present people at least with an idea of that there is an alternative to this. And I use the Heideggerian model to get to this part of my thesis, which is there is a way for all knowingness and all understanding, but it's not through reason, right, essentially. It's not through ego constructs. It's certainly not through your social ego persona. It's not through any form of collectivism at all. And it's not necessarily even through human beings, in your relationships with one-to-one human beings, which has become the whole cult of, well, you can't know yourself unless you know other people. That's true to a point, right? It's very valid. But the turning within, and also in my canon, you know, from the Druidic point of view, what about the inanimate? It's even a misnomer to even call things inanimate. It's hideous to call the light or a table an inanimate object. This is, again, this speciesism, if you want to call it, or some form of, it's a form of tyranny, actually. And then one other most important aspect to this connects directly with my theories on the mysterium, which ultimately are based in psychology, or let's call it existential psychology. The mysterium is basically an account of all human neuroses. Right? We've been talking about philosophy, but to be really truthful about it, the mysterium concept that I have comes under the umbrella of Otto Rank and the Neo-Freudians and their existentialist psychological paradigms. It's a way to explain all human pathology. And to quickly bring it up, quickly explain it, we turn to Jung and Freud here. Jung believed that the unconscious mind was a very powerful thing. And of course, it's street-level textbook, you know, coffee table book psychology is that all psychologists ask you to open the deeper reservoirs of the mind, you know, work with the unconscious elements and so on. Of course, it goes much deeper than that. However, even those teachers and psychologists of the highest level, like Freud and Jung, who were great champions of the unconscious, and that we needed to open up and be more holistic, unfortunately, they also felt that the unconscious mind has spurious, potentially negative, and in many cases even evil complexions. Right? This is not me making this up, this is in their work. For instance, to give you a concrete example, Jung's archetype, the most important archetype in the Jungian paradigm is called the anima. And it's all mankind's and womankind's ideas about what woman is, what mother is, what nature is. And these are all individual thoughts thought over the millennia that become concepts and that finally get embedded into the race memory and finally get embedded into the deeper parts of the unconscious as what he referred to as an archetype, basically a numinous embedded idea. And over the thoughts of every human being that's ever lived, these archetypes have enormous power because they're not your personal content, they're the content of all people who've ever had experience of what womankind is, both the good and the negative. And there's the key word negative, because in the normal accepted understanding of the archetypes, which again is the content of the unconscious, all archetypes, according to Freud and Jung, have this ambivalent split personality. I said Freud there, people go, no, you're wrong, Freud never even talked about the archetypes. No, but he talked about the pre-conscious content. So to all intents and purposes, he understood that the content of the unconscious has a negative aspect. Because remember, Freud thought that everything in the unconscious is a dumping ground of your conscious life. Those are just basically psychic garbage. That's what I mean. Jung took it a step further and said, oh, the archetypes are very necessary, you can't live a whole life without them, but be careful because they have this burning side. All man's experience of womankind hasn't always been pleasant down through history. There's the Medea, right? There's the Circe, there's the Salome, there's the evil mother, there's the smother mother. So in his lexicon, he would say, and also the animus and the archetypes, anima, they have a little bit of a negative side. I believe the same thing, but I've changed it. I think